What if the Avengers fought in the UFC? I think the best way to go about doing this is with a tier list to see how well these superheroes would do against the likes of John Jones, Conor McGregor, Alex Pereira, and so forth. But here's the catch. No powers, weapons, gadgets, or tech. We'll be basing how well they would do solely on their hand-to-hand combat skills and placing them in one of these 6 tiers. If a hero would get absolutely folded like an omelet and cooked without their powers or tech, they're going in the bottom. If they look like they might be able to hold their own in a few fights here and there, we'll put them in unranked. For those of you who don't know, unranked just means that they're good enough to be in the UFC, but won't be challenging for a title anytime soon. Journeyman means that they're in the top 15, they're fighting higher levels of competition, but they'll likely lose when facing the top contenders. Top contenders are the best of the best, they're always in talks about fighting for the belt, and they might even be good enough to be champion. If they are in the champion category, it means that this hero would 100% win a belt if they were in the UFC, solely based on their fighting ability, and I think unbeatable is pretty self-explanatory. The only way they're losing that belt is if they willingly give it up. Alright, starting us off, first we got Antman. Since most of his fighting experience comes from prison fights and a 5-minute montage of him hitting the pads with hope, I think it would be alright to say that he would be in the unranked category. If Kimbo Slice, who got most of his fighting skills from street fights, was able to hold his own against some of these guys, I'm pretty sure Scott would be able to do the same. Deadpool without his powers kind of reminds me of Tim Kennedy, who's also an ex-Special Forces guy. Even though Deadpool is one of the best martial artists in all of the Marvel Universe, his style relies heavily on the fact that he can regenerate, and since he won't have any of that, he'll have to be a lot more careful about not getting his limbs torn apart. That being said, Deadpool without his powers is still a pretty fast and agile martial artist, and I think he'd be able to make his way into the top 5 of whatever division he decides to fight in. Doctor Strange is next, and I'm just gonna go ahead and put him right there. I don't think I need to explain myself here. This friggin' nerd would get absolutely cooked in the UFC. Good guy Bucky is an interesting one, because ever since joining the team, he began to show a lot more restraint, and I definitely remember him losing a few fights in that Falcon and Winter Soldier show because of it. Nevertheless, he still has all the training and knowledge from being a hitman for all those years, so I think he'd still be a top contender. The only reason I'm not putting him in the champion category is because I think the people who I am putting there would be able to handle him pretty easily. Captain America. Let me just show you guys something real quick. This man was hitting the Winter Soldier with spinning back kicks and suplexes left and right, and he beat the greatest UFC welterweight of all time like he was nothing. Even with his super soldier serum, you gotta admit, that's pretty impressive. I really think someone with Chris Evans' height and strength, but Captain America's fighting knowledge would be pretty much unbeatable. The Hulk. Ah, God, what is that? The Hulk. Since I think it's pretty obvious at this point Dexter would get bullied by everyone, I'll be putting the Hulk in his own weight class and matching him up with other giants like Thor and Eddie. That being said, I still don't like the Hulk's chances because he didn't just get served up a 3-piece and a soda, he got handed the whole family meal by Thanos, and then went through a whole midlife crisis because of it. Size and strength are only going to get you so far, and I think the lack of willingness to get back up when things get tough are a pretty good indicator that the Hulk would not be able to keep up with the best of the best. Black Panther. T'Challa's Black Panther is probably one of, if not the best fighter in all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. When he fights, he's pretty much relying only on his hand-to-hand combat abilities. He was able to serve up the Winter Soldier like Thanksgiving dinner twice, and was evenly matched with Captain America the entire time. Hawkeye probably does his best work whenever he has a weapon in his hands. We hardly ever get to see him fight with just his fists. There's no doubt that he's an excellent fighter regardless, but good enough to be UFC champ? Not so sure. He's also not as fast as the other heroes above him, and I can definitely see someone like Dustin Poirier laying it on him after pulling up his shorts. Daredevil is another excellent fighter who was able to beat almost everyone he ever fought hand-to-hand, including Ironfist, the Punisher, and other really good martial artists. He's an expert in Muay Thai, boxing, and other forms of striking, but
nobody check the grappling.
Because of this, I think he'd still be able to win a belt like other fighters who became champions without a solid grappling base, but I don't think he'd be unbeatable. Black Widow is basically already in the UFC. If you're a fan of the sport, you know who I'm talking about. Her name is Valentina Shevchenko. She currently holds the record for most title defenses in women's flyweight history. She's a weapons expert, speaks multiple languages, and there were even rumors floating around at one point that she was a Russian spy. Black Widow would definitely be a champion. I'm gonna go ahead and put Gamora up there with her too, since she was also raised to be a trained killer. The only reason I'm not putting them in the unbeatable category is because I think they're both better at killing people than just knocking them out. When thinking about where to place Thor, I originally thought that he was just another hero that relied on his strength and power to defeat enemies. But then I remembered, even when he had lost his powers, he opened up a can of on a bunch of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and made a team of soldiers look like a light workout. He's also an Asgardian warrior with literal centuries of combat experience, so I think it's safe to say that he'd be a UFC champion. Falcon, I think, is the perfect definition of a journeyman. Like, he definitely knows how to fight, and he'll do well against an entire team of bad guys and a couple of evil super soldiers. But then he'll get folded by an 80-year-old man wearing cargo pants. For that reason, I cannot in good faith put him any higher on this list. Iron Man.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off, what are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
I didn't hear anything on that list about knowing how to throw hands, so unless I see some solid proof that Tony Stark knows how to serve up a proper knuckle sandwich, I'm just gonna assume that Tony would get clapped harder than I would clap Valentina Shev. Shang-Chi is one of the most well-rounded martial artists in all of the Marvel world. Having been trained since birth by a 100-year-old warlord in various forms of striking and grappling, as well as on how to use his environment to his advantage, I could see him using the cage to his benefit and being pretty much unbeatable. I think Drax is a decent fighter, both with and without weapons. He's shown that he can get a takedown, and that's probably due to his experience being a WWE champion. But due to his low fight IQ, he's also shown that he can be easily outwitted in a scrap. And we've seen time and time again that a low fight IQ is probably not going to get you very far. But I'll go ahead and be generous and put him in the journeyman category. I also just want to briefly mention that Dave Bautista has a single pro MMA fight against someone who looks like my plumber, who had a professional record of 20 wins and 22 losses. Do with that information what you will. I know Mbaku isn't really a superhero and isn't part of any superhero team, but I wanted to go ahead and include him in here just because of how much he reminds me of Francis Ngannou. This man is an absolute behemoth, and he was the boogeyman of the UFC heavyweight division for so long. Given that Mbaku is built like him and has the training of an African warlord, he'd have John Jones hiding underneath the UFC octagon all over again. The Punisher kind of reminds me of Robbie Lawler. I think he'd be a fighter simply too angry to lose, and he'd probably die in the cage before throwing in the towel. I don't know if he'd be good enough to be champion, but he'd be a solid top contender nonetheless. Ironfist. You know, for someone who's supposed to be quote-unquote the best fighter in the world, he sure loses a lot. Like a lot. Alright, this is getting kinda sad now. I know the show didn't really do him justice, but since we're going based only on the MCU, this is as high as he's going. Starlord is another one who we don't really get to see use his hands that often, but he did get laid out by Gamora in that first movie while she was going easy, so yeah. And last but not least, we have Spiderman. I know Tom Holland is basically 30 years old at this point, but Peter Parker at the end of No Way Home was supposed to be like 18 or 19, and unless Peter can say chee-wee-wees and fight like a Mexican kid that promised his mom a brand new car, he's getting sent back with the other nerds that got their lunch money stolen in high school. Alright, this is my list. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any issues with any one of my placements, go ahead and tell me in the comments where you think they should actually go. But that's going to do it for this one. If you guys want to see my breakdown of the best Batman actor we never got to see, check out my last video. And if you like comics, MMA, or superhero action in general, subscribe for more content just like this because I post every week or whenever I feel like it. Until next time, and see ya.